So, reason number three that God probably exists is that people seem to matter. Um, all over the world, in every society, in every known era, people have treated one another as though they have a fixed, objective, absolute value. Right? All of our laws, in Western culture at least, and as far as I'm aware of throughout the world, revolve around this idea that there are certain ways a person must be treated and certain ways a person must not be treated. And none of our laws relate to anything other than personhood ultimately. Anything that speaks about how you treat physical stuff is only in relation to how that stuff relates to a person, whether it's owned by somebody or whether someone has some authority over it or whatever. It's all bound up in the idea that people must be treated certain ways because they have a certain value, right? This is the foundation of everything we say about human rights. We're saying that to be human is to have an absolute value, and that nothing you can do fundamentally changes the value of a person. So we all know that you shouldn't worship a person simply because they're successful or wealthy. We also all seem to know that you shouldn't abuse a person simply because they're poor or even because they're a criminal. Even some of the worst and best things that a person can do don't fundamentally change the implicit value. Implicit isn't the right word. The intrinsic, that's what I'm looking for, the intrinsic value of a human being. And we might differ from one culture to another on exactly how to honor that value, but we agree that that value within a person ought to be honored. And you might say, well, hold on. Some societies and some individuals treat people with total contempt, treat people like they're worth nothing, treat people horribly. Unbelievable atrocities are committed between individuals. And what I'd say to that is that it's true, but actually very often the precise reason for those atrocities is the value of a human. It's amazing how often you look at abusive relationships and the abuser actually worships the person that they're abusing. On kind of a bigger societal scale, you look back through history, some of the horrible things that have been done. You look at kind of human sacrifice and stuff. Very often it's done precisely because a human is the most valuable thing that can be offered to a deity. So it's precisely because a person has a fixed value in a way that nothing else does that sometimes they've ended up being at the center of ritual sacrifice and things like that, which is horrible, but true. And then in those occasions, in those instances where people really do seem to devalue each other, whether it's on an individual scale or entire societies and regimes, genocides, things like that, where that does happen, the world looking on generally agrees, okay, something is out of line here. These people have somehow lost grip with reality. You talk about how Stalin treated people under his control. And generally people look at him and say, okay, there was a madman. There was a man who had lost touch with the facts. People seem to have an absolute value, but here's the problem with that. You and I know perfectly well that we're not absolute. In this whole giant cosmos, we are tiny and limited and short-lived. So the only way that we could have absolute value is if we are caught up in something absolute. If we are caught up in something, if we're related to something much bigger than ourselves, that is the absolute thing, right? It's like an economics idea. Money only has real absolute value when it's related to something physical. When the note in your hand relates to an amount of gold in a bank, then you have the potential for a very stable economy. And as soon as you try to disconnect the money from something physical somewhere, well, then the whole thing is destabilized and you have problems with inflation like we have all over the world and all that kind of thing. For a person to have an absolute value, they have to be related to something absolute. In other words, the only way people could have fixed value is if the foundational reality of existence, the self-existent cause of all things, is personal. Otherwise, a person can't matter in that way. If what underpins all of existence is a person, then being a person really is the most important thing imaginable. It means that you have a fixed relationship to something that is absolute. You are a part of the transcendent. Now that might sound like no big deal, but actually it might be the most important question you could ask yourself. Is really, am I part of the cause or am I part of the effect? Because I'm saying it seems that we are part of the cause. We are part of that absolute thing. It might not seem like a big deal, but consider the alternative. If you're not a part of the transcendent reality, if you're not above nature, then you're the same as everything else. Okay, so you may feel like you matter. You might feel like those around you have real value. You might think you have rights as a human being. But if actually you're only a part of nature, then you have the same value as a rock. You don't matter. No one matters. Not on any kind of absolute scale at all. Everything we seem to experience about ourselves in relation to the world around us and in relation to each other is actually empty and wrong. Because I think C.S. Lewis argues this really well in his book Mere Christianity. I think he talks about it there. When one rock crashes into another rock and destroys it, we don't call the first rock evil, right? Because they're all a part of the same order and it's all relative. And so it doesn't really matter what one thing does to another thing because they're all just empty things. And it's just the rearranging of matter. If we are only a more complex arrangement of the same matter with no deeper value, if we're just the same material as rocks, then we can't call it evil when humans harm each other or destroy each other, even because it's just the rearranging of the same matter. And the illusion that a human has value is actually just like this evolutionary blip that hopefully at some point we'll outgrow. So, if you say that there is no God, you're saying there is no absolute personhood in the universe, which is to say we relate to nothing. In our sense of being people, we relate to nothing, which is to say that we came from nowhere and we're going nowhere. We're on no absolute scale. And therefore, it doesn't really matter what one person does to another. Human suffering is not a problem because it's an illusion. Whereas if you say, no, people really matter in some fixed, definitive way that I don't have power to rearrange, that is to say that personhood is an absolute quality of the universe. And the only way for personhood to be an absolute quality of our existence is if the absolute reality of existence is a person. Now you might say, no, hold on. People don't have absolute value, but we just have this lovely opportunity to assign value to each other and to call each other valuable. Which sounds really nice. Like we're just doing this romantic thing in this harsh environment here. We all are loving each other and it's lovely. Sounds really nice. But the problem with that is, if I have the authority to assign value to another, then I also have the authority to assign no value to another. And so in a world where we all get to assign value to each other in some kind of relative way, there's really no argument that can be made when a person treats another person like they're worth nothing. Because it's just us rearranging things the way that we like. And so one person can say a person is worth a lot, and another person can say a person is worth nothing. And there's nothing that we can do about it. And in that sense, the worst atrocities committed on this planet are accountable to no one and have nothing to challenge them. And so, as uncomfortable as it is, to say that there is no God has to be to say that people don't matter in any definitive sense. And not only do I think that that's just inconsistent with the fabric of reality that we see around us, actually, I've never met someone who is able to live that out. I've never encountered a person who is able to act as though people don't matter. And you would expect that that should be the evolutionary goal, is that we should be moving towards a point where we suddenly wake up and recognize, oh, we're no different from anything else. We don't matter. There's no evidence that we're moving in that direction. Now, maybe you're thinking, well, that's just the horrible nature of reality. We don't matter, and here we are, and everything sucks. I think there's also good evidence that we really do matter as much as we think we matter. And we'll talk about that in the next video. I think the existence of morality is evidence that we really do matter, that we are absolute in some sense, or we are a part of something absolute. So we'll talk about that next time. But yeah, come back to me with your thoughts about that. Do people have absolute value? And if we do, what are the implications of that? I think the apparent value of human life implies the existence of an absolute transcendent person. Thanks, guys.